how do you prove that voter fraud is occurring or will occur in the future or may have occurred in the past? I mean, there's all sorts of theories out there about how you might do that, but here's just a crazy idea. Maybe you just ask people. You just ask people if they've committed voter fraud or if they plan to commit voter fraud. I know it sounds crazy. Who would ever admit in a million years that they've done something that would be illegal or that they're planning on doing something illegal in the future? Why would anyone do that? Well, good question. I don't know. But they have. People have admitted that they plan to commit voter fraud in the 2024 election. It's stunning. And it's part of a new poll that is recently out from the Heartland Institute and Rasmussen Reports, big national pollster. I wrote the poll, and I'm really proud of it. I think it's an incredible poll, really astounding results, and I think you're going to find that it is absolutely mind-blowing. But before we get into the results of the poll, I just want to give you a quick call to action. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed to the channel. Like this video, leave a comment. All of these things are going to help more people see this content in the future, because that's how big tech algorithms work. The more people are liking and subscribing and leaving comments, the more other people will be able to see that content. So please, if it won't take any money at all from you, it won't cost you anything at all, but it'll just take a moment of your time, and it will really mean a lot to me. Help grow this channel, which is still a fairly new channel, still trying to build the subscriber base for it. So if you could just take some time to leave a comment, like videos, subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. All right, let's pull up this poll that I wrote for the Heartland Institute and Rasmussen Reports about voter fraud. This is just absolutely mind-blowing stuff. All right, this is from the Heartland Institute's website. It has the headline here: Heartland Institute poll shows nearly 3 in 10 voters would vote illegally in 2024 presidential election. Let's scroll down a little bit so we can get to the results. The survey was a national survey conducted of 1,467 likely voters. So Rasmussen Reports, I think, exclusively does likely voters. So they actually ask people if they're planning on voting as a way of screening out people. So they don't just do registered voters or just all Americans. Rasmussen is especially focused on people who are likely to vote. And that was, perfect for this survey that we were conducting. So here are some of the questions. We're going to go over some of the questions, and then we're going to give you the answers so that you can see with your own eyes exactly what happened. But before we get to that, just sort of a broad overview of what we're doing here. The idea behind this poll is, for the most part, we want to ask people who are planning on voting in 2024 if they would be willing to commit voter fraud if given the opportunity. So if given the opportunity, would you commit voter fraud? But we don't want to ask them, would you commit voter fraud? Because most people don't want to say yes to that question. So instead, what we did was I wrote a bunch of questions that asked if a person would perform this activity, which is an illegal voting activity, but I didn't call it illegal, even though in many cases it's pretty obvious that it is illegal. And we told them right at the outset, before we started asking them those questions, this is going to be anonymous, which is entirely true. And, sort of giving them the green light, like, we're not going to go off to the, feds and tell on you if you say you're going to cheat in the election here. We're just trying to get an honest assessment of what's going on. And I think that giving people that qualifier sort of frees them up to be a little bit more honest than they might otherwise be. The other really interesting thing that we did in this poll is we asked pretty early on whether people would, who they would vote for. It was the second question. Who are you going to vote for if the election were held today? And depending on who they answered, so if they said Trump, for example, then when we got to the questions about voter fraud, not all the voter fraud questions, but a significant number of them, we would add in a line that said, would you do this thing, XYZ thing, if it meant stopping Joe Biden? So we asked the Donald Trump voters if they would do this illegal thing to stop Joe Biden. We asked the Joe Biden voters, would you do this illegal thing to stop Donald Trump? And, on so on and so forth, right? So the idea was we wanted to sort of remind people, like, yeah, this illegal thing, would you do this illegal thing if it meant stopping the other side? Because maybe that might make them feel more inclined to be honest about that part of it, right? Because that's how people think when they're doing these things. People don't just sort of stumble into illegal voting. A lot of people are voting illegally because they really want their side to win, or they really want the other side to win, or something like that. And I think it's important to bring that out in the questions themselves, because that's the most realistic way that people are thinking about these things. Okay, so right off the bat, we ask about Joe Biden's approval rate. It's 45% strongly disapprove, really bad for Joe Biden, 54% somewhat or strongly disapprove. That's a majority of voters. Strong approval was only 25%. That's 20 percentage points lower than strongly disapprove. That's really bad news for Joe Biden, but not relevant for the poll overall. So then we asked about voting, and what we found was that Donald Trump, 45% of voters said they would vote for him. RFK Jr., 11%. Joe Biden, 36%. This is in line with other polls. It does show a little bit more support for Donald Trump than some other polls. I talked to the Rasmussen chief pollster there, who's an awesome guy. We talked about this in depth, and he provided his reasons for why he thinks this happened and why he doesn't think that there was anything tainted here or anything like that. And I think he made a really compelling case. I think the RFK Jr. vote is taking votes away from Joe Biden at a higher rate than it's taking votes away from Donald Trump. It didn't look like that was going to be the case, by the way, in the past. Early on in the election, it looked like Joe Biden was going to benefit from RFK Jr. being in the race. Now it doesn't look that way at all. I think a lot of conservatives have caught on that RFK Jr. is not actually a conservative, even though he does have some libertarian positions on certain issues. All right, so the truth is, this Donald Trump number, even if you're very skeptical of that and you say, oh, wow, like 45%, that's too high. He shouldn't be that high above Joe Biden. I don't think that's crazy, but let's say you think that is crazy. It really doesn't impact the rest of the results, because as you'll see, we're asking people about voter fraud and stuff like that. It doesn't really help Trump to ask more Trump voters than Biden voters about voter. It just wouldn't have an impact on the rest of the results. So I just wanted to make sure that people know that. I talked about the sample size of being 1,400. Let me just pull up the margin of error, because I know a lot of people are interested in that. It's usually toward the very bottom. It had a plus minus 3 percentage points with a 95% level of confidence. So this is a very, very strong national poll. Plus or minus 3 points is considered very, very good. Okay, so let's get to the results, the really interesting stuff. All right, so we asked if a coworker or friendly acquaintance gave you permission to fill out and sign their mail-in ballot, allowing you to use their ballot to vote for anyone that you choose, would you? So in other words, would you, A, vote twice, essentially, because you're using someone else's ballot to vote, and we're asking likely voters only. So they themselves are voting, and they're now voting for someone else, and they get to choose whoever, they're basically taking someone else's vote. It's being given to them. All right. Now you might say to yourself, that seems like not that, maybe that's not that bad. Well, maybe you could make the case. I don't necessarily agree with this, but maybe make the case that morally that's not that bad, but it is illegal. It is a crime. You can't do this legally. So we asked about coworkers and friendly acquaintances. We asked about close friends, and we asked about spouses and other trusted family members. And what we found was 17% for coworkers and friendly acquaintances said yes, they would do that for a coworker or friendly acquaintance. 14% for close friends. It's interesting. That's a little bit lower than the acquaintance number. And then 18% for spouses or another trusted family member. That's not too surprising. The people you trust the most are your spouse and trusted family members. And so you're more likely to do this illegal action with them involved. So 18% said yes. So That's pretty incredible in and of itself, because 18% of all voters are saying, yeah, I would commit this. I would vote on, I would take someone else's vote if they offered it to me. Now, not everyone's going to be offered someone else's vote, but if given the opportunity, 18% of them are saying, yeah, I would do that if my husband or wife said that, or a close family member said that. So that's a pretty high percentage of people saying that they're willing to commit illegal voting. Okay. If given the opportunity, this is question number 6 here. If given the opportunity, would you alter the candidate selections made in a mail-in ballot belonging to a friend or family member without their knowledge? So now what we're saying is, would you alter someone else's ballot that you have access to without their knowledge if given the opportunity? Almost 10%, 9% of people said yes, they would do this. I mean, that's pretty stunning. They would essentially steal someone else's vote in their household without permission. 10% or 9%. That's pretty crazy. Okay. More questions. If altering the candidate selection were the only way to stop Joe Biden or Donald Trump, depending on who they said their preference was at the top, and question number 2, from being elected, then would you do it? 8% said yes. So this is related to the question number 6. Okay. So in number 6, we asked, if given the opportunity, would you alter candidate selections made by a friend or family member without their knowledge? 9% said yes. So then of the people who said no, we then asked question number 7, and we said, but what if it was the only way to stop Joe Biden or Donald Trump? And then another 8% of those people said yes. So when you add those two together, it's like it's 10% or over 10% overall of people said that they would alter a friend or family member's mail-in ballot without their knowledge if it meant stopping the other side, right? Okay. Question number 8. If given the opportunity, would you throw out or destroy a mail-in ballot? 11% said yes to that. Question number 9. If given the opportunity, would you cast a ballot in 2 different states to help stop Joe Biden from being elected as president? This is most easily done through mail-in balloting, but theoretically you could do this in person, but that's harder to do. Mail-in balloting would make more sense. 10% said yes, they would do that. If given the opportunity, would you offer to pay or reward another voter? Would you offer pay or reward to another voter, including friends or family members, to help stop Joe Biden or Donald Trump from being reelected president? 10% said yes to that question. Number 11, if given the opportunity, would you deliberately tell another voter incorrect information about the place, time, or date associated with casting a ballot to help stop Joe Biden and Donald Trump from Joe Biden or Donald Trump from being reelected as president? 10% said yes to that question. Okay, so when you add all these up, because this looks like, okay, so it's about 10%, right? 10%, other than the first section, we've got 18% say that if their spouse or a close family member gave access to their ballot, that they would basically vote twice. That's illegal. 18% said yes to that. 14% said they would do it for a close friend. 17% said they would do it for a coworker, friendly acquaintance. And then you got all these other questions that we asked about illegal activity, bribing voters with pay or reward, voting in 2 states, destroying ballots secretly, all this. And it's around 10%. It's like 8, 9, 10, 11%, depending on the question. But if you add all those questions up and you just say, okay, of the total number of people that we asked these questions to, what percentage of the total said yes to at least one kind of fraud? Because if they said yes to at least just one kind of fraud, that's your number. That gives you your percentage of the total group of voters who say that they would be willing to commit voter fraud. Right? They don't need to be willing to commit multiple kinds of voter fraud or any specific one kind of voter fraud. If they're just willing to do any kind of voter fraud, that's what we want to know. And the answer to that was, boom, 28%. 28% answered yes to at least one of those questions. Okay. 28% is a massive number. It is an absolutely massive number. All right, we're talking about tens of millions of people in effect, saying that they would be willing to vote illegally if given the opportunity, in large part to stop the opponent from winning. There were about 158 million ballots for president cast in the 2020 election. If you multiply that by 28.28 to get 28% of 158 million to figure out how many people we're talking about, you end up with 44.24 million voters. That's what 28% amounts to. So just as a reminder, Donald Trump lost the popular vote to Joe Biden by, I want to say it's 7 million ballots. We'll pull it up on the screen here. 2020 election results. Let's pull it up. There it is. 81 million to 74 million. So Biden, 81 million votes. Trump, 74 million votes. That's a 7 million vote difference. Okay? 7 million vote difference. God, I wish I hadn't pulled up CNN's. I don't want to give them even one page view of my time, but there it is. Okay? So 7 million vote difference. And what I'm saying here is there are 44 million votes, 44 million voters, I should say, who are willing, if given the opportunity, they're willing to commit voter fraud. Now, not all of them would have the opportunity, right? But a lot of them would have the opportunity because some forms of fraud here are not really that hard to imagine. Like a spouse basically saying, I don't care, you can use my ballot, I don't plan on voting, I don't like either of these candidates, or I never vote, that would be an opportunity for someone to commit voter fraud. Altering someone's ballot, if you live in a household where multiple people are voting or just one other person is voting, then you might have the opportunity to alter their ballot secretly. I mean, that's a form of voter fraud, right? And they'll probably never know it. If you just grabbed it, I'll take it to the mailbox. You take it to the mailbox, you change it. I mean, I know it sounds like, well, that's pretty disingenuous. What kind of a crappy person would do that? A lot of people, 10%, roughly, right? And so we're talking massive numbers of people saying that they're willing to commit some kind of voter fraud. Now, the demographics on this, because I know some of you are going to be thinking, okay, well, this has got to be mostly Democrats. Now, if anyone is watching this who's maybe a Democrat, you might be offended by that. But Republicans, this is how a lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives think. They think Democrats are the ones committing voter fraud. Republicans don't commit voter fraud. And that's how they think, right? But in our poll results here, what we found was it was almost identical. Republicans and Democrats, Trump voters, Biden voters, it was essentially the same. People, regardless of their political party, even independents, were highly likely, not quite as likely as Republicans and Democrats, but still highly likely to say, yes, I would commit voter fraud. I would do it. I would commit voter fraud. And so you can see these questions on the screen here. Trump voters only. That's the results we're looking at right now. Voting on behalf of a spouse, 19% Trump voters. Altering a candidate from being elected, 10% say yes to that. Given the opportunity, destroying a ballot of a friend or family member secretly, 12% said yes. 10% to the voting in 2 states question. 10% for offering a reward to another person, etc. I mean, Biden wasn't any better. Terrible results for him as well. 18% said that they would basically take their spouse's vote. 12% said that they would throw out or destroy a mail-in ballot belonging to a friend or family member without their permission, right? So again, we're talking about, huge numbers, and independents, again, not much better. So why? I think, one of the big takeaways from this that we have to ask ourselves is, what is happening? What is happening to our society where so many people on both sides are willing to say, yeah, I'd cheat if given the opportunity because we got to stop the other side. And I think it's our society is becoming so polarized and our values are becoming so different that elections are increasingly The stakes for elections are getting higher and higher, increasingly higher with every single election, it seems like. And people are getting increasingly more desperate to make sure that their side wins. And the ends justify the means is now becoming the way that so many people are dealing with this on both sides. It's really, really damaging. You can't have a free society where you have widespread fraud. Some people might be watching this and thinking, well, okay, so 28% of people said that they would be willing to commit fraud, but that doesn't mean they actually will commit fraud. And as I said earlier, you're right. Not everybody will. Not everyone will have the opportunity. Maybe some people say that they would do it and then they don't do it. But it doesn't take that many people committing fraud to change the outcome of an election. My friend at the Heartland Institute, great guy, research editor at the Heartland Institute named Jack McFerrin, put together this policy paper with myself and others at Heartland analyzing previous election results. And what we found was, I won't get into all the results there. I'll put a link into the show notes in case you're interested in reading the full report. But one of the things we found was, or we looked at, was what percentage of illegal votes would it take to change the outcome of an election? And so using the 2020 presidential election, we looked at varying percentages of mail-in. We only looked at mail-in ballot fraud. And we just said, okay, how many mail-in ballots, percentage-wise, being fraudulent, would it take to change the outcome of the election? If you removed these fraudulent ballots, at what percentage would you have a different outcome than what we saw in 2020? And essentially what we found was that you really didn't need a high percentage of mail-in ballots to be fraudulent to change the outcome. It was something like 5%, 4 or 5% of the election. I want to say it was 4 or 5%. Yeah. Because I think at 4%, it was a tie, electoral college vote tie, which would have probably resulted in Donald Trump being president. And at 5%, I think it may have been a tie as well, or Trump won. Again, you could see the results if you pull up the show notes. But the point is 4, 5, 6% in that range. That's all it takes to change the outcome of the 2020 election. And that's just mail-in ballots. That's not other kind of ballot fraud. That's just mail-in ballot fraud. Just 4, 5, 6% of the mail-in ballots have to be fraudulent. Well, it's not hard to imagine a scenario like that happening. That means 95% of the ballots are fine. Mail-in ballots, right? And 100% of all the other ballots cast don't involve fraud too. So it's just a tiny percentage of the votes. There were 3 states in 2020, 3 that were decided by, I want to say it was 21,000 votes or less. It was Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia. And these 3 states where 21,000 votes was the difference between Biden and Trump winning, and Biden won all 3 of those states. Had all 3 of those states gone to Donald Trump would have been president. Donald Trump would have been president, not Joe Biden. So it doesn't take that much in total between the 3 of them. It was less than 50,000 total votes made the difference. 50,000 votes decided who was going to be president in the last election, ultimately. And so you don't need a lot of mail-in ballot fraud to change the outcome of an election. You only need like 5% if we see something similar in 2024 to what we saw in 2020. 5%. And when you have 28% of voters saying that they would commit fraud if given the opportunity, and not just mail-in ballot fraud, but other kinds of fraud, like telling people the wrong place and time to vote and stuff like that, bribing people, about 10% said they would bribe people. I mean, this is stunning. You can't have a free society when you have a massive proportion of the population saying that they would be willing to do something like that. You just can't have a free society when that's going on. Another really interesting thing from the poll results that a lot of people in the media that covered it, it did get a fair amount of media attention, as it should have. It was featured by the Glenn Beck radio program, Stu Does America on the Blaze TV. There were a bunch of publications for mentioning the poll in the Federalist and Town Hall and a whole bunch of other places. But one of the things that got overlooked in most of the media coverage of it, most of the op-eds that were written about it, etc., is the demographic breakdown of the people that said that they would commit fraud. So if you just look at the people who said that they would be willing to commit fraud and you look at some of the demographics, what you find is that men were more likely than women to say that they would commit fraud. 32% of men to 24% of women. We're talking about of the group of people that said that they would commit one kind of illegal voting, at least one kind of illegal voting. 32% of men fell into that category, and 24% of all the women that we polled fell into that category. 18 to 39-year-olds were significantly more likely than every other age demographic to say that they would be willing to commit fraud. It was something like half of all. It was just over 52%. 52% of 18 to 39-year-olds said that fell into the category of yes. Okay, so that's stunning, right? 52% of 18 to 39-year-olds said that they would commit one kind of illegal voting in order to stop the other side. I mean, this is stunning. These are stunning numbers. Stunning. Absolutely stunning. It was 20% for those who are 40 to 64, 15% for those who are 65 and older. We also saw a clear correlation to where people live. Urban voters were more likely than rural voters, for example, to say that they were going to commit fraud. There were some interesting things in here about political parties. I already talked about that. 32% of Democrats versus 28% of Republicans. Education level was also really interesting. 46% of those who did not attend high school said that they would commit fraud. Compared to, it was something like, 20% for those who had some college, 27% who graduated college, 28% for graduate school. So again, it's really, really interesting, right? We're talking about graduate level people were more likely to say that they were going to do this than people who had some college education, but no high school education was the group most likely to do that. So just really interesting stuff in the data. If you're interested in learning more about that, I will include a link in the show notes to the Rasmussen poll so that you can check that out whenever you have time. Okay. I think that's enough depressing news for today. Look, we're headed for some pretty troubling times here with the election coming up. It's not a Republican or Democrat thing. We are living in a society right now where a large percentage of voters are willing to cheat, and that is not a good thing. That is bad for society. No doubt about it. We have to stop being so polarized, and we have to start realizing that regardless of whether you win or lose, it's more important that we have a system that people trust. If we can't trust the system, we can't trust that the outcome is going to be fair, then we can't have a functioning democratic republic. Like, it just isn't possible. Again, I urge you to check out the show notes for links, for sources, for all of this stuff. Do your own homework. Check it out. If you have questions, please leave it in the comments section. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff's going to help me out. Until next time, my name is Justin Haskins. Please stay free.